together a playlist for my test measurement and assessment class, or more colloquially known as assessment and counseling, with a lot of good techniques and just methodology on how we use assessment well in counseling. I've loaded this into Notebook LM in order to create a podcast. So what follows are AI voices. So I've taken my PowerPoints and notes, loaded them into Notebook LM. That analyzes it, creates this audio-generated AI voices. I've listened through it. It's accurate. There is one thing I want to point out. They talk about our land acknowledgement. We're about an hour, campus is about an hour away from the Cherokee boundary. You may see behind me, actually just 5 minutes from my home, I find artifacts. And so I like that we have this land acknowledgement in this, so that that may be a little bit right at the beginning where you're like, what is this? Otherwise, hang out about 15 minutes just analyzing how we do assessment well. This should be very helpful in terms of the National Counselor exam, but definitely for the assessment class in counseling. All right, enjoy.
Have you ever really wondered what's going on beneath the surface when you're trying to understand someone? Beyond just the words, how do we actually grasp the huge complexity inside a person?
It's a really deep question, isn't it? Especially when you think about how much people don't say, or maybe don't even know about themselves.
Exactly. And that's pretty much the heart of our mission today on the Deep Dive. We're going to dig into some really rich source material, specifically lecture notes from a course called Tests, Measurement, and Assessment in Counseling. It's from Western Carolina University, taught by Dr. Russ Curtis.
And what's interesting right off the bat, I think, is how the source material itself sets the stage. It starts with a land acknowledgement for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
Yeah, and it mentions the Judacular rock artifact. It immediately gives you this feeling, this grounded context. Like, this isn't just about abstract data points. It's about understanding people and their world, their history.
Which brings us right to the main question for this deep dive. How do counselors actually use these formal assessments? I mean, not just to stick a label on someone.
Right, not just for a diagnosis.
Exactly. But to genuinely understand and hopefully empower clients. And, what are the surprising problems that can pop up, and what are the real benefits?
And we should be clear, this isn't like a heavy stats class or a purely diagnostic manual kind of thing. The source really stresses it's about how to pick the right tests, how to use them, how to interpret them.
To help people communicate better.
Right.
And increase self-awareness.
Yeah, and ultimately empower them. Dr. Curtis says the goal is actually to expand your own perceptions of yourself, of your clients, of healing, even the world. So it's a pretty big aim. It's about shifting how you see things.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with us. The human element. Why are we, just as people, often not great assessors?
Yeah, the source points out some really common mistakes we make, like we tend to either see too much pathology or not enough. We swing back and forth.
Or we completely miss things, like the impact of oppression or inequality, or maybe issues like sexual abuse, substance use, OCD, social phobia, things that might be hidden.
And it mentions something called workshop syndrome.
Ah, yes. Like you go to a training, get really excited about a new idea.
And then you start seeing it everywhere, maybe oversimplifying it.
Exactly. That initial enthusiasm can sometimes, make us miss the finer points, the real-world complexities. It's a good caution.
That makes sense. It's almost like a bias in itself. So beyond those kinds of behavioral tendencies, what about just how our brains work? Does the source get into cognitive biases?
Oh, definitely. And it's fascinating. We apparently form first impressions incredibly fast, like 30 seconds to maybe 3 minutes.
Wow, that fast.
That fast. And we also tend to give more weight to stories, anecdotes, than to actual systematic data.
Yeah, stories are more compelling.
They are. And we're apparently not very good at seeking feedback on our own judgments. Plus, we often make decisions based on whatever similar case comes to mind most easily, which isn't always the most relevant one. Big potential for bias there.
And here's something that really jumped out at me from the notes. Clients are often more honest on paper with assessment instruments than face-to-face with their counselor.
Isn't that something? It really makes you think maybe it's the perceived objectivity? Less vulnerability in front of a form than a person?
Could be. And the source suggests these tools can help counselors spot other issues that might not come up in conversation.
Right. And there's also a practical side. Documented assessments can help address liability concerns. It's not just about, covering your bases, but building a solid, documented understanding. It protects everyone involved, really. Shows the seriousness of it all.
Okay, so if we as humans have these built-in flaws in assessing others, maybe the tests can help compensate. Or do the tests have their own problems?
That's the critical next step, isn't it? And yes, they absolutely have limitations. The source brings in Leona E. Tyler's perspective from way back in 1984, which is still so relevant.
What did she say?
Basically, that tests don't measure the unique characteristics that make someone who they are. And whether a score is high or low says absolutely nothing about a person's actual worth, their value to family, friends, society. That's not what tests measure.
That feels incredibly important to state up front, especially when you think about something like IQ tests. They've been used so widely, almost like a definitive measure.
But they're not. The source points out they don't measure your innate potential, your born with it ability, and they aren't even that stable over time. Scores can actually go up or down a bit.
And they don't measure how well you adapt to life, right?
Right.
Which seems pretty crucial for, well, intelligence in the real world.
Exactly. And maybe the biggest thing they miss is motivation, or GRE-RC, as the source calls it. That persistence, that resilience, that often predicts success in school or work way better than an IQ score.
Yeah, you hear so much about grit these days. Okay, so what about other types of tests, like interest inventories or personality tests?
Well, interest tests can tell you what someone likes, sure, but they don't predict if they'll actually stick with it, if they have the passion and persistence for it.
And personality tests.
Those are tricky. They were mostly developed to identify pathology, mental health issues. So a good score often just means you're relatively free from pathology.
That's a really key distinction.
It is. And here's another fascinating point from the source. Lots of really significant contributing people in society have actually experienced mental or emotional disturbances. It kind of normalizes struggle, doesn't it? It shows it doesn't automatically disqualify you from achieving things or having value.
That's a powerful point. It seems like with all these tests, even the useful ones, there are these major caveats, these blind spots. We're always walking a tightrope.
Absolutely. And that leads back to Tyler's quote, which sums it up perfectly. The practice of basing important decisions on test scores alone is unsound. So is the policy of dispensing with tests altogether. You can't just throw them out either. It's about using them wisely, integrating them, not relying on them solely.
That balance seems key, and it suggests counselors really need to think much bigger, more systemically about a client, not just their personal story.
Which opens up this idea of different domains of assessment, right? We need multiple lenses.
So what are these lenses? The source lays out four main ones. First is biological.
Yeah, genetics, how genes are expressed, the physical body stuff.
Then biographical, that's sort of the life history, right? Conception, birth, death, family, society.
Everything in that timeline. And the source notes that counselors often get stuck only here, potentially missing other crucial factors.
Okay, what's the third?
Environmental. This is fascinating. It's pollutants, toxins in food, water, maybe side effects from medicines. The notes even mention an Oprah story example.
Oh, yeah.
Where guests talked about links between air pollutants and things like brain tumors or depression. It really highlights how our outside world can affect our inside world.
That's huge. And the last one.
Existential. This is about the search for meaning, for purpose, asking those big questions. Why am I here? Am I living according to my values? It really pushes for that holistic view.
It really does. Okay, so if that's the broader view, let's get practical. Why actually do these assessments? What's the purpose, and what are the steps involved?
Right. The source gives four main purposes. First, screening. Just a quick check to see if there might be an issue needing a closer look.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, diagnosis. And importantly, this includes looking at strengths and challenges, not just problem.
That's good, not just deficit-focused.
Exactly. Third is treatment planning and goal identification, helping the client see, okay, here's where I am now, here's where I'd like to be, and how might we get there?
So it's collaborative.
Ideally, yes. And fourth is progress evaluation, basically checking if the therapy is actually working. The source calls this an ethical and professional responsibility. You need to know if you're helping.
Okay, those are the whys. What about the hows? The actual steps.
It flows pretty logically. You start with problem orientation, like a needs assessment, figuring out the main concerns, then problem identification, maybe using those screening tools we mentioned.
Got it.
Then you generate alternatives, maybe through an interview, exploring different options or ways forward. Next comes decision-making, perhaps using a structured way, like a decision matrix, to choose a path.
And finally,
Verification, checking in, seeing if it's working, maybe using rating scales during or after sessions. It's kind of a cycle. Assess, treat.
it's ongoing. So what kinds of tools or methods are actually used in this process?
Oh, there's a huge range. You've got the big split, standardized or formal tests versus non-standardized or informal qualitative ones.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Standardized tests have really specific rules how you give them, timing, scoring, and the key is they compare results to a norm group. Like an IQ test compares you to a large sample of others.
And the source mentioned the MMPI-3 norms.
Right, that's a classic example for personality assessment. It gives you that benchmark comparison. Non-standardized is more flexible, things like an intake interview, observation, no strict comparison group.
And it seems like there's a whole bunch of other methods too. You mentioned situational tests, where people react to scenarios. That sounds intense.
It can be. They might feel a bit artificial, but they give you a direct look at behavior in a specific situation, which self-reports might miss. Then there are speed versus power tests. Speed is about quickness, power is about tackling difficulty, even with time.
What about 360 assessment?
That's getting feedback from all around, colleagues, clients, supervisors, plus your own self-assessment. Gives a really rounded picture.
And rating scales, we've all used those.
Mm-hmm.
But they have pitfalls, right? Like the halo effect.
Exactly, where one good trait makes you rate everything else positively, or the leniency error just being too nice in your ratings.
Then there are those projective techniques,
Mm-hmm.
like drawing your family or using a sand tray. Those seem really different.
They are. The idea is they tap into unconscious thoughts or feelings.
Right.
And you also have simple behavioral observation, like tracking a student's time on task.
Plus biographical measures, like using a portfolio instead of just exams.
Right, showing actual work. And even physiological measures are coming in, things like monitoring heart rate, temperature, eye tracking, getting objective body data.
Okay, wow. That's a lot of ways to gather information. So once you have the scores or the observations, how do you make sense of them? How do you interpret the results?
Good question. There are three main frameworks for interpretation. First is self-referenced.
Meaning compared to the person themselves?
Exactly, compared to their own past performance, like
Yeah.
tracking improvement in time on task for that student.
Okay. What else?
Second, criterion referenced. This compares a score to a fixed standard or benchmark. Like you need to get 90% correct on a test to get an A. The standard is set beforehand.
Right, like passing a driving test.
Perfect example. And the third is norm referenced. This is where most standardized tests like IQ or personality tests fall. You compare the individual score to the scores of a large representative norm group.
So you see where they fall relative to average performance in that group. Now, with these different ways to interpret self, criterion, norm, are there common mistakes people make, especially with norm reference scores?
That's a really important point. A huge misuse is forgetting that a norm reference score only tells you how someone stacks up against that specific group. It doesn't define their absolute ability or potential.
You shouldn't treat it like some kind of definitive label.
Precisely. It's just one piece of data. And to make the whole process ethical and sound, the source emphasizes a few key things. You absolutely need supervision getting feedback on your assessments.
And triangulation, what's that?
It's like in surveying, using multiple points to get an accurate fix. Here, it means getting input from the client, using your own clinical judgment and observations, and potentially getting perspective from a significant other or another source.
So combining different viewpoints for a more complete picture.
Exactly. It builds reliability. And remembering it's about continuous assessment, that cycle of DX, DX, TX, diagnosis, treatment, reassess.
It really underscores that this takes real skill. Which brings us to the competency levels the source mentioned. Not just anyone can give any test, right?
Absolutely not. There are different levels required by test publishers. Level A tests are pretty open, maybe like a simple career interest checklist, no special qualifications needed.
Okay.
Level B usually requires at least a college course in tests and measurement. You need some foundational knowledge.
And level C.
That's the most restricted. You generally need an advanced degree in a relevant field, maybe licensure or membership in a professional body, plus specific documented training on that particular test.
Which tests fall under level C?
The big ones, really. Things like the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the Wechsler Intelligence Scales, Ways for Adults, WISC for Kids, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, and even those projective techniques like the house person tree drawing.
So drawing a simple picture requires advanced training to interpret properly.
In a formal assessment context, yes. because the interpretation can be complex and have significant implications. This whole tiered system exists to protect the client, basically, to make sure these powerful tools are used responsibly and ethically by people who actually know what they're doing. It highlights the seriousness involved.
So, wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for someone listening? This deep dive really shows the power these assessment tools can have, doesn't it? Not just for diagnosis, but for deeper insight, for empowerment, even for just normalizing that everyone is unique and might have struggles.
That's a great summary. And it also reminds us of our own limitations as human assessors and the limitations of the tests themselves. But I think the overriding message is the need to think broadly, systemically, to consider all those domains, the biological, biographical, environmental, existential, to try and get that whole picture.
Yeah, that quote from Tyler keeps coming back to me. Basing decisions on test scores alone is unsound, so is dispensing with tests altogether. It's that middle ground.
Exactly. Neither extreme works.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. If relying only on tests is bad, and ignoring them completely is also bad, how can we all work on refining our own internal assessment instruments? Critical thinking, our empathy, our ability to pull together different kinds of information.
To really honor what the source calls the vast, unique complexity and potential of each client.
Yeah. But maybe not just for clients. Maybe for everyone we interact with. How do we get better at truly seeing the complexity in people in all parts of our lives? Something to think about.